In MR, long scan times mean imaging is compromised by the body's movement. But now, Sonic DL scans fast enough to match the speed of the human anatomy. This is our vision for life speed imaging. Our deep learning technology accelerates procedures from minutes to seconds. Allowing you to reach the apex between swiftness and diagnostic quality. Rapid imaging reduces motion artifacts and the need for repeat exams, letting you empower caregivers with faster procedures that synchronize with the rhythm of their workloads. Harness deep learning agility for diagnostic clarity. Sonic DL. Life speed imaging.
Hello. Welcome to the GE Healthcare ISMRM Lunchtime Symposium. My name is Anya Brau, and I'm General Manager of MR Clinical Solutions and Research Collaborations at GE Healthcare. I'm delighted to kick things off today with an introduction to the new GE Healthcare and a new product introduction. And then I'll turn it over to our three distinguished speakers today, starting with Dr. Shreyas Vasanawala, who'll speak about efficient functional and anatomical imaging. Then Dr. Samantha Holdsworth will speak about her work translating high-tech MRI in a rural environment in New Zealand. And last but not least, Colonel Robert Chi from Walter Reed Medical Center will talk about mild TBI investigation with our high-performance gradient platform. First, as you may have heard, GE Healthcare recently spun off from General Electric as our own separate company earlier this year. And at 50,000 employees, we like to call ourselves the world's largest startup. But we already have a very large global footprint with an installed base of over 4 million units, which gives us an enormous sense of purpose to deliver precision care to patients around the world. And we serve over 1 billion patients annually. Our healthcare priorities for MR is to deliver precision care by developing and deploying next-generation systems and devices, advancing clinical care with applications tailored to disease all along the care pathway, from screening to treatment monitoring, and leveraging data and deep learning for better results. I will touch on these topics in reverse order, beginning with deep learning. And we are proud to lead the industry in the number of FDA-cleared AI-enabled devices. Our most successful AI product to date has been Air Recon DL. This was launched in 2021 and has had over 3,000 orders, 2,000 installations, and over 10 million patients scanned, which is really the true testament to its use in clinical practice. This is a denoising and sharpening method that has spurred a revolution in MRI by changing the paradigm between image quality and scan time. This is compatible across all anatomies, all scanners, all coils, and benefits over 99% of MR exams. And it's really been raising the standard of clinical excellence across all application areas that we've applied it to, from 2D imaging to propeller to 3D and even quantitative imaging. For example, look at the excellent sharpness and detail of these axial 2D phase-sensitive IR brain images acquired in 40 slices in 4 minutes. When Air Recon DL is applied to quantitative imaging, such as MAGIC, synthetic imaging, it enables thinner slices and in less time, preserving the parametric measurements and reducing standard deviation of the noise, which in turn yields improved segmentation results, for example, in myelin maps, especially at 1.5T. Air Recon DL compatibility with propeller means one can now combine the quality improvements of Air Recon DL with the motion robustness of propeller for excellent results, as seen in this female pelvis example, both sagittal and coronal T2s. Or in this shoulder, with consistently sharp images across the different contrast weightings in this extremely motion-prone area. Air Recon DL applied to 3D imaging brings fantastic clarity both in plane, but also through plane, as seen in these different white matter nulled and T1 MP RAGE images. In fact, you'll see it's difficult to determine which plane was the acquired plane and which the reformatted one. And this improved quality improves the repeatability of volumetric segmentation with post-processing tools, as we demonstrated in an abstract last year. And here's a 3D Air Recon DL example, post-contrast in the body at 1.5T, with multiple adenomas depicted clearly in both the acquired axial and reformatted planes. So Air Recon DL was definitely a revolution, but we didn't stop there. We next turned our sights and asked the question to the problem of, can we solve problems of imaging at the speed of human physiology? MRI continues to get faster, but we're not fast enough, and challenging anatomies demand that we scan even faster, especially for anatomies like the heart. Cardiac imaging is the gold standard for measuring structure and function, but the problem is MRI speed is still too slow to faithfully capture cardiac motion. At our best, with parallel imaging, we can get a few slices, which is insufficient to capture the cardiac function. So conventionally, we pursue a segmented approach, which collects portion of data across multiple beats, and then stitches that together to create one apparent beat. One beat can be reconstructed, but it was actually acquired over 10 beats. So this is what I call the fake it till you make it approach. And that's only for one slice. If you needed to acquire, as one does, the full stack, we have to repeat that 12 times, and each time is in a breath hold because we're averaging data across multiple bins, multiple heartbeats. So you can see that this is clinically a very difficult thing for patients to do. To complete full functional assessment would mean 16 breath holds in 10 minutes. What if I asked you all to perform back-to-back breath holds over the next 10 minutes? How do you think you'd do? And now consider a cardiovascular patient whose most common symptom is shortness of breath. It has always struck me as somewhat ironic and unfair that the sickest patients, the one who needs it the most, are the hardest to image well. MRI has been too slow for too long. And now we'd like to introduce a new technology, imaging at the speed of life. So we're proud to introduce Sonic DL. This is newly FDA-cleared technology and is a new deep learning accelerated solution for rapid cardiac imaging, which offers reduced scan time with up to 12-fold acceleration for imaging in as fast as 1 heartbeat. Compare that to conventional parallel imaging with 2 times acceleration at 10 beats per slice. With Sonic DL, we can reduce that to 3 beats per slice or even 1 beat per slice with excellent fidelity and image quality. And at this acquisition speed, we're finally matching the speed of physiology to acquire a true heartbeat in real time, with acquisition speed matched to physiology. Quickly on how it works, we developed this technique together with Stanford, with Shreyas and his colleague, Chris Sandino. This is a physics-based deep learning technology, and it takes as input highly undersampled case-based data and applies an unrolled iterative network consisting of both data consistency and CNNs to generate final unaliased time-resolved cardiac imaging in a matter of seconds directly inline at the scanner. And this gives you tremendous flexibility to tailor exams to be rapid, high-quality protocols in either breath hold or free breathing. If the patient can tolerate a short breath hold, the conventional scan can be shortened from 10 beats per slice in the past to 3 beats per slice now. If the patient cannot breath hold, a free breathing protocol can be selected, reducing a conventional multi-averaging scan that's up to 40 beats per slice down to 1 beat per slice, dramatically shortening the scan. The total scan duration for acquiring all views can thus be reduced from 10 minutes of the past to 3 minutes with Sonic DL. We have a number of publications from Stanford, Iwate, and then 2 abstracts here this year supporting strong clinical evidence for accurate cardiac volume and function calculation in adult and pediatric patients, underscoring its use. And take a look at these testimonials from some of our early adopters with very fantastic feedback. Dr. Matthias Friedrich calling it a game changer, and Dr. Pontone from Monzino saying the acceleration is so high you can scan regardless of the situation and the patient. But I'd also like to touch on a few other advanced clinical applications enabled by our new imaging capabilities. For example, we're seeing an increase in the use of bone osteo imaging. Osteo is our ZTE-based MR bone imaging technique, which can be used to render these 3D bone images together with neurography sequences like this cube stir example of a thoracic outlet syndrome caused by rib fusion, providing excellent radiation-free images for pre-surgical planning. This ZTE sequence can also be successfully applied to respiratory-gated lung imaging, offering a radiation-free alternative to CT at 3T for different respiratory and oncology applications. And we see an increase with the emergence of Alzheimer's therapy and the associated PET and MR imaging requirements, the possibility of use of a one-stop shop with PET-MR. We have implemented the consensus protocols for ARIA screening in our latest MR software, which together with our 48-channel head coil, Air Recon positioning for consistent longitudinal assessment, and Air Recon DL provide a great longitudinal screening opportunity. And then our motion-free PET recon provides improved PET image quality in the presence of motion, as you can see in the middle. And lastly, I'd like to touch on our next generation systems. We are launching our latest PET-MR version called the PET-MR Air, which brings air coils and motion-free brain to our industry-leading time-of-flight PET system and combines that also with Air Recon DL technology. And these systems are useful for a variety of oncology, theranostics, and, as I mentioned, Alzheimer's patients. Our Cygnus 7T system is a powerful clinical and research system powered by familiar Cygna applications like Air Recon DL and outfitted with powerful ultra-G gradients of 113/260. And here are latest results from our very recent installation in Riken in Japan, showing susceptibility-weighted results, very fine detailed venous structures in the brain at 7T. We've also developed 2 different configurations of high-performance 3T investigational systems for advanced neuro research, and these are growing in number around the world. The Ultra High Performance 3T, or UHP3T, is a whole body high performance gradient system with efficient 113/260 gradients, ideal for structural and functional neuro studies, with the capability also of whole body imaging. And these are some fantastic 0.8 millimeter isotropic results from Duke University demonstrating cortical columns in the gray matter. And last but not least is Magnus, which is a very exciting head-only system that offers the most powerful performance at 300/750, enabling structural, functional, brain circuitry, and cortical activity imaging. This can be installed as an upgrade to our Cigna Premier whole-body systems, and we expect 4 installations by the end of this year. And I'm really looking forward to hear Dr. Shi's results later in the session from the first customer installation. So with that, I'd like to bring on our first customer speaker, Dr. Shreyas Vasanawala. He is a radiologist in chief from Stanford Children's Hospital, and he will speak about efficient functional and anatomical imaging. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya. This is really an honor to be here. It's wonderful to see everybody in person at ISMRM. So I'll be talking a little bit about efficient functional and anatomical imaging. As Anya mentioned, I'm a pediatric radiologist, and that provides a lot of the motivation for this talk. As you may know, T2-weighted imaging is the major component of almost all MRI protocols and occupies the bulk of the time that's spent on scanners. Unfortunately, it's relatively slow, and especially for pediatric patients, it can be challenging for them to remain still during these exams. So we started a few years ago working with GE on redeveloping and rethinking single-shot fast spin echo, which eventually turned into the widely available snapshot imaging technique. And as you can see here, it winds up reducing image artifacts by directly reducing the scan time, say down from 4 minutes to about 600 milliseconds per slice here. Unfortunately for children, that speed is still not necessarily sufficient enough. I think as many of you know who have small kids, 600 milliseconds can be a lot of time for a lot of motion to occur. And so we started looking at how do we incorporate compressive sensing techniques to accelerate the acquisition. And so here's an example where you can see the benefits of compressive sensing, where you've used some modest acceleration, 2.5-fold acceleration, again for scan time about 600 milliseconds per slice. But then with the compressive sensing technique, we can further accelerate, say here to 3.3-fold acceleration, and now the scan time is dropping even further. And despite this increase in the scan time, we still see that the image reconstruction remains quite solid. So for example, on the left, you see an artifact from parallel imaging. You don't see that artifact on the right. However, there's still a couple of challenges with this type of approach. The first is that in these types of reconstructions, you do have to choose a regularization parameter, and it can be very difficult to choose the optimal regularization parameter across a variety of patients, especially if they're varying in patient size. And here, this choice of the correct regularization parameter is quite critical to the quality of the images. So this is one challenge that is there with compressive sensing. Another is that because the reconstruction is an iterative technique, the reconstruction speed can take quite a bit of time. And so here, the reconstruction time is longer than the data acquisition time, particularly for single-shot imaging, where the acquisition is now so fast. And so unfortunately, you have these image reconstruction queues that develop that are not clinically practical. And this is true even if you have some high-performance compute systems on site and connected to your scanner. So an approach that we took to try to address this is to leverage a deep learning reconstruction. And here, the benefits of this is that the regularization is learned in the reconstruction process. And in addition to that, the inference in the clinical practice can be done practically in real time and is much, much faster than a conventional compressive sensing reconstruction. And so here you see an example where the image labeled A is done with a conventional CS. The image on the right is one with a deep learning technique where the regularization's been optimized, and you can see that the image quality has improved quite a bit because the conventional one was effectively under-regularized. And then this type of approach eventually evolved into a widely available on the GE systems Air Recon DL that Anya had mentioned, and that has gained such widespread adoption. Here's just an example from our practice where if you're just using parallel imaging alone, you wind up getting an image that was a bit too noisy for this patient size and coil geometry, but the deep learning reconstruction actually improves this to where you get diagnostic image quality. So with that, we then started looking into extending this to cardiac imaging, and this was a result of a very nice collaboration between multiple people that were at Stanford as well as folks who were with GE Healthcare. And here again, we focused on the one sequence that occupies the majority of the scan time for our patients who are undergoing cardiac exams, and that is cine imaging. So it's a routine component of our exams, particularly pediatric exams, and it's really required to assess the cardiac function, such as ventricular volumes and ejection fractions. And as I mentioned, this is unfortunately quite lengthy, and as Anya had mentioned, it involves a number of breath holds, which can be very difficult for this particular patient population. And so here we extended this deep learning approach to reconstruction. So again, it was an unrolled network architecture with blocks of data consistency. And here, to deal with the fact that the training time can be quite lengthy for these types of approaches, we use separable 3D convolutions to make the learning more efficient. And so here's an example. This is now retrospective, so we fully acquired data here. It's fully sampled, as shown on the right, for a cardiac cine exam, and you can see this in the short axis. And then despite undersampling by a factor of 10-fold, we see that with this type of approach, we get a pretty good reconstruction. And in fact, the reconstruction quality can be superior to that of a conventional compressive sensing. And here you can see that the reconstruction error, particularly say in the area of the ventricular septum, which can be moving relatively fast, or the anterior wall of the right ventricle, that reconstruction error has been improved. So then going from retrospectively proving this concept, we now showed this in a prospective way. So here the acceleration is 12-fold. This allows for 5 slices to be acquired in a single breath hold, and you see that the image reconstruction quality is quite good. One of the nice things about this is that if you do a conventional type of acquisition where you have to get multiple breath holds, invariably these patients will wind up holding the breath in slightly different positions for breath hold to breath hold, and as a consequence of that, the cardiac position will change from breath hold to breath hold. And so if you're trying to assess the ventricular function, you wind up getting these types of artifacts. And actually, the top example that I'm showing here, the top row, you can see some of this where it's a little bit hard to assess what's the cardiac function. And I would say that this is a relatively mild example of this problem. We often see even more severe examples. But in the bottom image, you can see that if you acquire now all of the heart as a stack of slices in the short axis in a single breath hold, leveraging the acceleration from this type of approach, then you can actually see that all the slices are now nicely registered, and it's much easier to assess what the cardiac function is. So now, as Anya had mentioned, this is now much more widely available in the form of Sonic DL and is present on the various GE platforms. I'm going to highlight a few different types of use cases for this that we found particularly helpful. So the first use case is looking at high resolution, and in particular, high temporal resolution. So in this particular example, you're seeing a tricuspid valve that's regurgitating, and you see actually the dynamics of the valve pretty well because the temporal resolution here is 23 milliseconds, which is quite good for capturing this. If we push the acceleration a little bit more, we can wind up getting even shorter breath holds. Instead of a 7-second breath hold, in this case, it's a 4-second per slice breath hold, and this would help those patients who can cooperate, but only to a certain degree. So this is a nice example of that. You can push the acceleration even further, so here it's pushed to 12-fold, and now the entirety of the data acquisition for a single slice is actually confined to 1 heartbeat, so you can manage arrhythmias this way and have reasonably good image quality despite the arrhythmias. And then finally, for those patients who cannot cooperate at all, we have a free breathing acquisition. So here again, the acceleration is 12-fold. All of the data for a particular slice is acquired in 1 heartbeat, and so you don't have to worry necessarily about the respiratory motion. You can just respiratory trigger these exams. So I'd just like to highlight a few use cases in more detail. So here you can see that high temporal resolution use case that I talked about. The image on the left is the example I showed of the tricuspid valve regurgitation. Another patient is shown on the right. So this was case that was a transposition case, and you can again see now instead of the inlet valve, you see the outlet valves with high temporal resolution of 25 milliseconds with the scan time of still just 7 seconds. Here's another example of this high temporal resolution use case. Here's again 7-second scan time, and you're seeing the dynamics of the aortic valve quite nicely. Now here's another use case. This is the free breathing acquisition. So on the left, you're seeing those 9 breath holds in order to get a short axis stack using a conventional parallel imaging type of technique. That nominally takes about 2.5 minutes, but actually if you wind up accounting for the time that it takes for somebody to hold their breath and then recover and hold their breath again, we all know it's much longer than that. On the right, you'll see an example, same patient now, this is with no breath holds at all, and the entire scan, the entire short axis is completed in 1 minute with very good image quality. In this particular case, this is a 72 beats per minute heart rate, so relatively average, I would say, for teenagers and adults. The problem gets more challenging, though, when the heart rate starts going up. So here's another example. This is a real-time scan effectively because it's a single beat per slice. And here the heart rate now is 117, so it's going up. The whole scan here was 18 seconds to get a short axis and worked out quite nicely. So, now I'm going to show another example. This one is one where it's even pushed further. So here, this is a neonate. And in this particular case, our typical approach is to do just multi-signal averaging types of approaches. So you see on the left, a conventional scan took almost 3 minutes. Heart rate here, 152. But with the deep learning approach here, now the whole scan is just 14 seconds. And this is despite, again, a heart rate of being around 150. This is very helpful when you have a newborn and you're trying to avoid anesthesia and you're just hoping for that little quiescent period where they're not crying in the scanner. If you can get a good 14 seconds, you can evaluate the cardiac function. Here's another example. So this is one that involves a severe arrhythmia. So you can see there's either 2 conventional approaches. You either just use parallel imaging, which unfortunately has artifacts from the arrhythmia because a single slice is acquired over multiple heartbeats. It's not a consistent location of the heart. Or you can do real-time imaging, but assessing the cardiac function from that in a quantitative way can be pretty challenging. Instead, here we can use a deep learning type of approach. And so here you can see on this video that's playing on the right that, again, despite the severe arrhythmia, you have a very good quantification of the ventricular function and good delineation of it. And so here I've shown several examples. We started with 2D imaging that was for the workhorse of just nice fast spin echo T2 weighted imaging that forms the bulk of many, many protocols. And then its adaptation to cardiac cine imaging and several very helpful use cases, particularly for pediatric imaging. Thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge many of our collaborators for this work. There's the folks at GE Healthcare, there's the whole Stanford team, and then also the team of Mickey Lustig that's at UC Berkeley as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shreyas, for those compelling clinical cases. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Samantha Holdsworth. She's from the Matai Research Institute in New Zealand, who will talk about translating high technology to New Zealand communities. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much to GE Healthcare for the invitation to have Matai speak today. It's a real pleasure to talk about our community organisation, where our goal is to translate high-tech imaging into Aotearoa, New Zealand. So for those of you who don't know where New Zealand is, it's just down there, just over the ditch from Australia. And so if you zoom in a little bit, this is where we are on the east coast of the North Island. And here is Gisborne, and that's where Matai is. It's the first city in the world to see the sun. We're just a little town, just to put it into context. We've got more aMRI machines than traffic lights, and we have some of the best beaches in New Zealand. Another unique feature is our planes give way to our trains on the runway. And what's unique about where we live is we have 50% Māori, these are our indigenous peoples, 50% non-Māori. It's also an area where we experience high inequities and reduced access to healthcare and education. So we opened our doors in 2020, and we got the wonderful 3T GE Signa Premier scanner. And what's really helped us move fast is our partnership with GE Healthcare, especially with Dr. Hari Kumar, Hari resides with us. He's an on-site GE scientist, and we also have a wonderful collaboration with Dr. Jerome Miller. So together with the team, we came up with our vision and priorities. Here it is in Māori and English, which highlight the importance of doing research with our community, alongside our community, and that's very, very important to us as a community organisation. We also prioritise our youth by creating a future pipeline in STEM, and this is an area which is not often seen in our community, so it's really, again, a big pillar of what we do. And here's a great example of bringing our community alongside us with our research. So every time we do research, and we have research outcomes or research results, we make sure that this is disseminated first with our families of the participants before it's published in an international journal. So we've got a number of projects, and this is just a sample of some of them, but I'm just going to discuss 6 of these projects today. And just the first one is our child imaging study. So here what we've done is worked alongside GE Healthcare and the Auckland Bioengineering Institute to come up with a 1.5-hour imaging protocol for 7 to 12-year-olds so that we can come up with a normative database which is more reflective of our community. So the goal here is to predict and prevent diseases. And so we're taking images from head to toe, brain, heart, musculoskeletal system, vascular, and really leverage our collaborators at the Auckland Bioengineering Institute's world-class computational modelling methods. And here's an example of the output from our first pilot study, where we've taken the images from each of the different body parts, and we've created computational models, the Auckland Bioengineering Institute teams have, and then they've made predictions about the variability in structure, function, and physiology. So for those interested to know more, here's the article that just came out, and the next steps will be expanding this project into a larger cohort and scanning kids over a longer time frame. So segueing on to the ADHD project, this is led by Associate Professor Justin Fernandez, who's in the scanner right there. And what we're doing here is using the hyperband resting state and task-based fMRI to better understand biomarkers of ADHD. And so there's 2 kind of things here. We're looking for better biomarkers by looking at the altered functional networks and on the middle part there. And also, Justin is very interested as to why people with ADHD tend to fidget. And so the results of that study is in poster 3343. I'll just go back a bit, and we also got a wonderful PhD student called Gina, who is Māori, and she's developing a culturally relevant ADHD assessment tool, which uses these imaging findings to help come up with that tool. So we're also working on amplified MRI research and development, and for those who don't know what amplified MRI is, just coming back, the idea for amplified MRI came from this work from a group by MIT, where they took real-world videos and they used a video processing algorithm to amplify the very subtle motion in these real-world videos. And so we thought, why can't we just apply or tweak this and apply this to medical imaging? And we did that, and back in 2016, we took a Cine MRI data set and tweaked the algorithm and applied it to amplified MRI, applied it to the Cine data set and came up with this amplified MRI image, which shows the brain deformation with a single heartbeat. And the basic underlying thought we had was that different diseases will affect brain motion. So being able to amplify this motion, it could be a different way of looking and understanding brain health, especially in things like obstructive disorders of the brain. And now we've got a really large international research team working on various aspects of amplified MRI, ranging from sleep studies all the way through to clinical applications. And I just want to pick out one of those. That's the work by Itamar from Stanford, who has just recently developed the Quantitative amplified MRI tool, which takes the qualitative data and directly extracts the displacement fields from this data. And so back in 2016, when my team and I developed amplified MRI, it took 30 seconds to get a slice. We were just getting mid-sagittal slices, just because we didn't have enough time to collect whole brain. And since then, we've continued to improve amplified MRI, and we've got it down to 2 minutes. And that's really mainly in part, is possible because of this 3D Cine Fiesta implemented by GE Healthcare. So we're using the GE's 3D Cine Fiesta, and we have that sequence down to 2 minutes, and we're really looking forward to implementing the Sonic DL on this as well, because it's going to go even faster. And so we can get full brain with 1.2 millimeter isotropic resolution in a scan time of under 2 minutes. And that's just using, there's no extra special hardware, it's just the peripheral gating that's needed for that sequence. In terms of the motion ability to detect motion, we can detect 6 microns for a resolution of 1.2 millimeter isotropic. So with regard to applications, so we're looking at Chiari malformation. We've got a project in New Zealand that is to do with using amplified MRI alongside other types of imaging modalities to come up with a brain pressure index, applying it to hydrocephalus. We're also using amplified MRI in our impact simulations for our concussion research. And there's also the work by Mehmet Kurt and University of Washington, who are using a method called AFlow, which is based off amplified MRI to predict the stability of aneurysms. So we are looking for multi-site evaluations. So if you want to know more, please contact us, either Hari or Matai, and we would be happy to speak with you. So just very quickly about our concussion project. We've got a beautiful partnership with our Gisborne Boys High School rugby team, where we have the mouthguard with sensors in them, and we're imaging the boys pre, during, and post-season. And we're collecting not only imaging, but also neuropsych testing. There's microRNA, there's ultrasounds, and this is all with the goal to come up with better biomarkers of concussion. And we've got a couple of abstracts there of interest. And segueing on the eye disease biomarkers, so currently the mechanisms of diseases such as IAH and glaucoma are not very well understood. And so we're imaging the orbits to better understand eye disease. So our imaging data here is based on that 3D Cine Fiesta, and we're using it from the structural images to help differentiate between IAH and glaucoma. So in IAH, the optic nerve bulges into the globe due to the high intracranial pressure compared to the low intraocular pressure. And on the contrary, in glaucoma, the globe pushes into the optic nerve, and the 3D rendering here is shown as well. Again, that's based on this 3D Fiesta, and we're getting very high resolution. It's 0.8 millimeter ISO in a scan time of 2.5 minutes for these sequences. And we're also using amplified MRI to help understand the relationship between movement and eye pressure, alongside our ophthalmologists here. Now, last but not least, we've been very lucky to be able to work with an MRI pioneer, Emeritus Professor Graham Bidder, who we've adopted at Matai. And alongside Graham Bidder, we've been applying his mathematical framework for increasing the sensitivity to MRI for subtle signs of disease. So what the mathematical framework does is explains the light-dark contrast that's seen on the images, and it makes it possible to design basic inversion recovery sequences that will detect very subtle abnormalities. So what you see on the left here is normal appearing white matter on the T2 FSC, and here on the targeted MRI method, which is otherwise known as MASDR, we can see these three lesions here, and we can actually just make that diagnosis of MS on that slice alone. Another feature of this method is you can see that this sort of etching-like appearance, that's the grey-white matter boundaries, so we're seeing a new feature there. And importantly, not only do we have these focal lesions, but we see these very diffuse abnormalities. In fact, 80 to 90% of the white matter is abnormal in this case, and we could not see this on the FLAIR. Now, what you can see here on the right is that's a normal brain, so normal brain is supposed to be black, and so you can see it's very highly abnormal in this MS patient. We're also using targeted MRI in our methamphetamine recovery study, where we're tracking people who are trying to recover from methamphetamine addiction. And what you can see here on the left is a FLAIR, where you can see a brain with a significant amount of atrophy due to 30-year meth addiction. But what you can't see is any abnormality in the white matter. If you go over to the targeted MRI, you can see the very diffuse white matter abnormalities here, which is picked up very nicely with this new sequence. It's exploiting very small differences in T1. And if you just compare that to an age-matched control, this is a heavy smoker. Age-matched control, you can see this is normal appearing white matter. So it's just like day and night here, the sequence. We've also been tracking, as I said, we've been tracking people who are recovering from meth. And this is a recent case where this person who was addicted to meth for 30 years came onto our program, and he was abstinent for 8 months, and you can see his brain is bouncing back. You can see that normally some inflammation, well, not inflammation, it might not be inflammation, but there's some, the normal appearing white matter is here. So it's really changed from white to black, and we can really use this, begin to use this in a number of diseases where the thought is that neuroinflammation might be the underlying cause. So if you want to know a little bit about the method, the paper itself is going to be at the front after the talk. So I just really want to say, just to conclude, that in a modern world with a very strong global network, it is possible to bring advanced technology, and it makes a huge difference in a community, in a small rural community, if you can bring that tech to the community and work alongside the community to implement new techniques. And you can attract the best minds, and if you have that strong technical partnership with GE Healthcare, you can really increase the access and education to rural communities, in our case, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I just want to thank you to our wonderful Mātai and University of Auckland and GE whānau. Whānau means family in Māori. Our tairawhiti community, those who participate in our research, and to our major funders. So I just want to leave you with a special Māori proverb. E hara take toa e te tō takitahi, engari he tō takitini. Success is not the work of one, but the work of many. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for sharing those amazing projects, and thank you for your partnership and leadership at the center. Our last speaker is Colonel Robert Shih from Walter Reed Medical Center, who will speak about TBI, mild TBI investigation using the Magnus platform. Colonel Shih.
Thank you, Anya. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Shih. I'm a colonel and neuroradiologist in the United States Army. I am stationed at Uniformed Services University and at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. It's my honor to be able to share with you some of our early work on Magnus for biomarker discovery in mild traumatic brain injury patients. I have no financial disclosures, and everything in my presentation is my views alone and do not reflect the official policy of the Department of Defense or United States government. What do the following conditions have in common? If you take a look at that list here, I would say that the first thing they have in common is you're increasingly recognized as a source of morbidity, of brain health, impaired brain health and impaired brain function in modern society. And that includes our own active duty service members, who are often expected to perform optimally, even in difficult, dangerous, and nighttime operations. The second thing I would say they all have in common is that they all highlight the limits of conventional neuroimaging, where our typical clinical CT, clinical MRI are often unrevealing or unremarkable in these patients, even when they have debilitating neuropsychiatric deficits. So let's talk about unconventional imaging. GE Research has been working on higher performance through head-only gradients. And these head-only gradients, the smaller diameter allows them to have lower power requirements, lower overall inductance, and lower E fields. That translates into higher gradient amplitudes, higher slew rates, and higher PNS thresholds. In the bottom, from left to right, you can see gradient schematics for a typical clinical whole-body 3T scanner, a research compact 3T head-only scanner installed at Mayo Clinic, and the Magnus head-only scanner, research scanner installed at Walter Reed. And it's the unique design of the Magnus, with this increased separation between the inner primary gradient coil and the outer shield coil, that allows for that high coil efficiency that you see highlighted in red in the lower right. Here are some photos from the Magnus installation at Walter Reed and Uniformed Services University from a few years ago. The top row is the de-installation of the built-in body coils. And the bottom left is a neuroradiology colleague of mine, Dr. Kevin DeMarco, and myself standing next to the gradient insert. And the bottom right 6 images is the GE research team hard at work sliding that Magnus insert into the MR750, converting into a research-only ultra-high performance scanner. The Magnus are designed for excellence in diffusion imaging. Here are some pictures from a standard 3-shell DTI with a Bmax of 4,000. These images are from the B0, of course. If you take a look at the left image, that is a 2.2 by 2.2 by 2.2 millimeter B0 image from a whole body scanner, and the TE is around 80 milliseconds. If you take a look at the second, third, and fourth images, these are gradually decreasing spatial voxel sizes, increasing spatial resolutions from 1.5 to 1.2 to 1.0, and we maintain signal to noise even at the 1.0 millimeter image, partly due to the lower TEs that are achievable with a magnet scanner around 50 milliseconds or less. In addition to doing a standard multi-shell DTI, we also wanted to explore some new biomarkers that are enabled by having these ultra-high performance Magnus gradients. The first being intra-axonal microstructure imaging. Can we actually estimate the diameters of the axons? And the second being time-dependent diffusion with very high frequency OGSE, oscillating gradient spin echo, higher than you can do on a clinical whole body scanner. So let's talk about the first. The first is microstructure imaging with axonal diameter mapping. We think of the white matter as two compartments, one being the intra-axonal compartment, a bunch of cylinders with restricted diffusion, and the extra-axonal compartment being hindered diffusion. We have this equation showing the diffusion signal contribution from both compartments. It turns out that the diffusion response is dominated by the extra-axonal compartment at standard B values. So if you're imaging with B values below 6,000, a lot of your signal is coming from the extracellular extra-axonal compartment. We start to get deviation from the power law at high B values above 6,000, and that is the realm, the regime at which we start to develop increased sensitivity for intra-axonal compartments. So the bottom line is to do axonal diameter measurements, you need ultra-high B-value diffusion MRI. You can see some of the details of our acquisition protocol in the upper left. I'm going to draw your attention mostly to the shells here. We're doing 60 directions at very high B values, 7,000, 18,000, 25,000, and 30,000 seconds per millimeter squared with adequate signal. And by mapping the signal response relative to the B value, we were able to estimate the, and focusing on the intra-axonal compartment, we were able to measure the axial perpendicular, the perpendicular diffusivity within the axons, and then use that to compute an effective axonal radius or diameter from that perpendicular diffusivity. And there's two ways that we've played with so far for presenting this data. One way is with a voxel by voxel color map, just like this, ranging from 0 to 5 microns for what we estimate the effective radius to be. The other way is by these brain parcels. You can see 22 brain parcels. This is for the left hemisphere, that's for the right hemisphere, and these are average effective axonal radii in those left-right brain parcels. The second biomarker we wanted to explore was with high-frequency OGSE, looking for changes in the parallel direction within the axons, which we hypothesized might reflect intra-axonal beating of varicosities in a setting of traumatic brain injury. One thing I'm going to highlight here is with the magnet scanner, we are able to achieve almost a B-value of 500, even at an OGSE frequency of 100 hertz, and this is much higher than what is achievable in pink on a clinical whole body scanner. For example, if you wanted to do 100 hertz on a typical clinical whole body scanner, you might be limited to a B-value of 100. And these images kind of show the same idea, just with some pictures. On the left, if we insist on the B-value of 500 and keeping TE less than 130 milliseconds, then you're limited to a frequency of 40 hertz on a conventional whole body scanner, whereas on a Magnus powered by a 1 MVA power system, you can get up to 100 hertz like we did, or if you have a 2 MVA system, you can go up to 120 hertz. If we keep a constant B-value of 500 and insist on a frequency of 100, you can see how you don't get any signal at all on a whole body scanner with a TE of 580 milliseconds. And it's only with the ultra high performance gradients that you can get smaller TEs where you can get some signal at a B-value of 500 and a frequency of 100 hertz. And on the right side, if we insist on a frequency of 60 hertz and fix the TE to 90 milliseconds or left, we're limited to a B-value of 160 on a whole body scanner. We can go up to 1,000 on a 1 MVA Magnus or 2,000 on a 2 MVA Magnus. So I'm going to share some of the initial findings that we have from our early analysis of our mild TBI data. This is on a Magnus 1 MVA system. For our study protocol, we recruited not just from Walter Reed and Bethesda, but also from Felt-Bovar Community Hospital in Northern Virginia. And we recruited into 3 cohorts for acute mild TBIs. One of the inclusion criteria was we had to be able to get them inside the Magna scanner within 2 weeks, and then we imaged them longitudinally also at 30 days and 90 days, and did both Magnus and conventional scanning. Our second cohort was chronic mild TBIs, defined as over 6 months and less than 5 years. And our third, we also recruited healthy control. So we ended up with a total of 95 subjects recruited, all with Magna scans and neuropsychiatric testing. We're going to focus on the middle rows here for our acquisition protocol, the diffusion-relevant sequences. We did a 3-shell DTI. Sorry, that's a typo right there. Went up to 4,000. We also did OGSC that I mentioned earlier. The resolution on that was 2.2 millimeters, and we did a B-value of 450 at 5 different frequencies up to 100 hertz. And for the high B DTI, intended to look at the intra-axonal compartment, as I mentioned earlier, those B-values range from 7,000 to 30,000. I'm going to share some anecdotal data before I'm going to go into some summary data. Here's an example of a 30-year-old female who was rear-ended at very high velocity and had very severe post-concussive symptoms. If you look at the conventional imaging, including kind of the regular kurtosis maps and also the FA map, we don't see much asymmetry. We thought we might get a hint of an asymmetry kind of in the left parietal white matter on the OGSC maps of parallel diffusivity within the axons, and also possibly on the effective axonal radius map. Another way we presented the data was with these symmetry charts, where we placed the measurements for each of these parameters across the 22 parcels, left versus right hemisphere, and we also presented it as what's the degree of asymmetry. And I know this is very small, but you can also see there's these kind of little blue lines within here. That's mapping the ranges that we found in our healthy controls. So we use these asymmetry charts to estimate how far is this out of the range of what we saw in our cohort of healthy controls, was our symmetry analysis. Here's a healthy control for comparison, where we did similar maps based off OGSC data and also effective axonal radius, and we don't see the same asymmetries that we saw in our concussion patient from earlier. We'll skip the animation. And also in the quantitative symmetry analysis, the same left-right charts that I showed you earlier, we saw a lesser degree of asymmetries on this healthy control compared to that one concussion patient. What we did with all 90 subjects so far is that we had 2 neuroradiologists review those visual maps as well as the asymmetry charts in blinded fashion, so they did not know which cohort the patient belonged to. And if we look at the qualitative maps and the quantitative bars, I'm just going to draw your attention to this out here. So we feel like effective axonal radius on the asymmetry charts is the most promising metric so far, red being our acute mild TBIs, yellow being our chronic mild TBIs, and green being our control patients. This is just another way of saying the same thing. When we looked at our ratings across our 2 neuroradiologists on both the visual maps as well as the quantitative symmetry charts, we kind of saw the most separation between between acute chronic controls, the biggest changes in distribution between our ratings using the effective axonal radius chart there. Sorry, running a little short on time. This is the last slide. To summarize some of our clinical study findings from mild TBI studies, we saw some image asymmetries, but it seems like the quantitative analysis with the asymmetry charts are more prominent than the qualitative visual maps. And our early data suggests that the most important thing for us to pursue further is that effective axonal radius, and possibly correlating with some of those neuropsychiatric measures that we obtained in all of our subjects. These microstructure imaging biomarkers are really enabled by having this one MVA Magna scanner that can achieve 200, 500 gradient performance, translating some of the stuff that people have done on preclinical animal scanners. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Colonel Shi. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for sharing with us how they're using GE technologies to improve speed and access and disease insights. If you'd like to learn anything more about our GE healthcare products, Sonic DL, or other technologies, please visit us in the booth. Thank you all for coming, and this concludes our session. Thank you.